It is my pleasure today to host this conversation with Shafi Goldwasser, who has recently taken over as the Scientific Director of the Simon Institute for Theory of Computing at Berkeley. In addition to this very important role, Shafi is a professor of computer science at Berkeley, MIT, and the Weizmann Institute in Israel. Shafi is an exceptional leader in the field today, with notable contributions that have had lasting impact. She's the co-inventor of the idea of probabilistic encryption and zero-knowledge proofs, two central ingredients in her quest to establish a sound foundation for modern cryptography. She's also founder of the fields of probabilistically checkable proofs, property testing, proof delegation, and you name it. Additionally, she's noted for building bridges between areas within and outside the theory of computing, including connections to number theory, with the first algorithm for certifying primality of numbers, and connecting the aforementioned probabilistically checkable proofs to the approximability of optimization problems, a field that has revolutionized combinatorial optimization today. All this work and no fun. Well, actually, she got a few awards during this period, which must have been pretty nice. Most notably, she's the winner of the ACM Turing Award. This is the highest award in the field of computer science. Other awards that she has won include the Benjamin Franklin Prize, the Manuel Blum Award. She's a member of the National Academies in the US, in Russia, and in her home state of Israel. And two awards that I'd like to mention in addition are the Grace Murray Hopper Award and the ACM Athena Award, where her presence elevates the visibility of excellent work done by women in the field, despite the very many challenges. So in our conversation today, I hope we'll hear a little bit about her explorations in the field of computer science and about the community, the awards, and the challenges. So, Shafi, looking forward to talk to you.
Thank you, Madhu, for this very kind introduction.
Okay. So, must say, it was very gratifying writing these few paragraphs, and I was sort of quite impressed that I could compress it down to just that much. So, all right. So, let's start with the beginning. So, how did you get to become a computer scientist? Tell us a little bit about how you started and got into this field.
Okay, so I began as an undergraduate student at Carnegie Mellon, but even to go to Carnegie Mellon was somewhat accidental. I was a high school student in Israel. I was always pretty good in science and math, and I somehow arrived to Carnegie Mellon because my brother was a student there.
Okay, well, that's nice. Was this a computer science? Were you doing computer science at Carnegie Mellon?
No, I was doing applied math. In fact, there was no undergraduate in computer science at the time. There was a concentration or focus in computer science. And after a couple of years in applied math, I took a computer science course on algorithms and data structures, and then it's sort of one thing led to the other. I came to Berkeley as a graduate student, and I kind of fell in love with theory of computing and started working on it.
Was there one moment where you felt, was it at Carnegie Mellon, was it at Berkeley, when you felt this is really the field that you want to be in? It was gradual, maybe.
So the question is, what is the field?
Right.
So when I was
an
undergraduate student in Carnegie Mellon, I think this whole idea of programming and writing programs and designing algorithms, and then you execute them and you get results, was fascinating. Okay. I've never seen a computer before. I was a junior probably in college. And the computer science problems, the discrete math was enjoyable. But the truth is that the course that I probably enjoyed most as an undergraduate was a course on artificial intelligence, that whole idea that in particular the aspect of artificial intelligence that I was drawn to was had to do with linguistics. At the time, I remember there was a project for generating poetry automatically. Oh. And I wrote this program and it generated these horrible poems. But I think they were grammatically correct.
Do you write poems?
No, I don't write poems.
Okay. Well.
I think that was the end of my career of writing poems. So that was artificial intelligence, right? And then that made it was kind of obvious that I would go and study computer science in graduate school. But when I came to Berkeley, I actually didn't study artificial intelligence. In fact, I worked with Manuel Blum, who was a theorist, and I did work in theory. Within theory, the course that really kind of clinched it for me was a course that Manuel Blum taught.
Okay. That's great. So that probably brings us to some of your early works. So from now on, I'd like you to explain to us in some depth some of your works. I mean, I reeled off some names: probabilistic encryption, zero knowledge. You can pick and choose, though I would love to start with your first result. Which one was that?
Well, the first result that I think really is worth talking about.
Oh, there are some others.
Yeah. So the first result that I think is worth talking about is this idea of how to encrypt a single bit. So when I took this class from Manuel Blum, it was a class on computational number theory, which is essentially how to solve problems in number theory using algorithms, to solve them quickly, to find certificates, short certificates for something being a prime or being composite. And one of the interesting parts of the class were the last few lectures, where he gave some lectures relevant to modern cryptography. So at the time, modern cryptography was about 2-3 papers. It was Public Key Cryptography by Diffie-Hellman. There was the Reverse Shamir and Adelman paper. And Manuel asked this very simple question: how do you toss a coin over the telephone? So somehow, what was interesting about that question is many things, but one of them was that there was a single bit answer, which was the value of the coin.
So let me poke a little bit into this question. How do you toss a coin over the phone? So we want to talk to each other over the phone, and at the end we want to say, is it heads or tails? And
that's right. So we are opposing parties.
Okay.
You may want heads and I want tails, and we have no way to communicate except by sending messages to each other. So this is talking over the phone.
Okay.
And the question is, how are you going to do that? There's no physical coin that I can toss and tell you the value because you don't believe me. So how can we emulate, using message exchange, the effect that at the end there is an unbiased bit, at least
50% heads, 50% tails.
So 50% heads and tails would be too good to be true.
Okay.
It would be an outcome such that neither one of us would have any noticeable effect on making it either heads or tails.
Okay,
Noticeable effect means within a polynomial amount of time.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so tell us more about.
Okay, so in terms of my result, so then at that time, encryption or public key cryptography or encryption based on number theory, really it was RSA. It was a Reverse Shamir and Adelman scheme where you encrypt messages. And it's sort of inherent in that scheme is that the messages have to be, large in a sense, because otherwise it's a deterministic encryption scheme where for every message there's a single way to encrypt it.
Okay.
So an obvious question that came up at that time was how much partial information is hidden about the message from its encryption. And the reason why that came up is because people were using encryption in order to play card games, or at least there was a beautiful paper by Shamir, Reverse, and Adelman called How to Play Mental Poker. And the question there was, somehow the idea was you encrypt the cards and you have a way to deal cards to each other. But they didn't address the question, what about leaking partial information about the card from its encryption?
Right.
Which would be extremely important in a card game.
Right, of course.
Because
You don't want to know the color of the card.
Exactly. Right. So it distilled, so the question was how we're going to encrypt cards in a way that would hide all partial information. And the crux of that question is really, how do you encrypt a single bit?
So how do you toss a coin over the phone?
So how to toss a coin the value is an unbiased coin. It could be 0 or 1 and you want 50-50.
Right.
Here you actually have either a 0 or 1 and you want to encrypt it.
Okay.
Of course, if you could do that, you could also toss a coin.
How is that?
Because suppose the way we would want to define encrypting a 0 and a 1 is that you won't be able to tell better than 50-50 whether I encrypted a 0 or 1. Then what I could do, if we're trying to toss a coin, is I would toss a coin, maybe, to decide whether I'm going to encrypt heads or tails. So heads might be 0, tails might be 1. Then I encrypt the value of the coin and send it to you. If the encryption was so strong that you can't tell apart whether I encrypted heads or tails, now you make a guess.
But you're now committed to saying...
I'm committed. Exactly. Okay. You make a guess. If you guess the right value, then I open it up. Then you win. If you guess the wrong value, I win.
I see. So, okay, great.
Okay, So in any case, so the first result there was, how do we encrypt a single bit?
Yeah.
And I think that probably in terms of sort of research breakthrough, that's probably the first that I can remember. One of the ones I'm most attached to, maybe because it's the first, and that was to find a problem, a yes-no question, a computational problem which seems to be difficult to decide better than 50-50.
Okay, great.
And in addition, that you can generate instances where the answer is yes and instances where the answers are no, and this immediately leads to a way to encrypt a single bit, because you come up with an instance where the answer is yes if you want to encrypt a 0, you come up with an instance when the answer is no when you want to encrypt a 1. Now, since it's hard to distinguish whether the solution is yes or no, the adversary, when I send you the instance, I'm trying to encrypt a bit to you, can't tell whether it's yes or no. The only thing that still remains to be understood is how do you know whether the answer is yes or no?
Yes or no. So eventually you want to convince me that this is what you did.
So actually for encrypting a single bit, the problem that that I'm talking about is called deciding whether a number is quadratic residue or quadratic non-residue, mod a composite number.
I see.
And if you know the factorization of this composite number, you can actually tell.
Oh, I see. So this is one of those problems where if you knew how to factor numbers, no secrets would be hidden.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, assuming that factoring is hard and maybe a few more things, you could guarantee that this one bit was encrypted and I would not know what it is till you tell me what it is.
Right. In fact, what you assume is that deciding whether a number is a square, a quadratic residue or quadratic non-residue is hard in some worst case sense. And what we showed, this is work with Silvio, is that then it's not only worst case, but there's a worst case, the
random case, okay.
Random reduction.
So it seems like many ideas went into your very first paper, or the first one that you're willing to talk about. I should mention that this is probably one of the works that was cited in the Turing Award citation. It's pretty impressive for a course, for outcome of a course project, one could say.
It wasn't a course project, it was just that he really managed to explain to us or get through this excitement about how number theory and the difficulty of certain problems in number theory and the ease of other problems. So here are the difficulties of factoring, but the eases of generating these quadratic residues and non-residues, or the ease of solving it when you do know the factorization, whether something is a quadratic residue or not. He managed to somehow really transmit this excitement that these problems can be the foundation for solving sort of real-world phenomena, like sending a message or like tossing a coin.
That's amazing. So, I mean, it's sensational. I do want to talk to you about your feelings as a student while you were here, but maybe we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Sure.
I do want you to tell us a little bit about your other favorite results. Maybe let me start, since you started with your favorite. My favorite would have probably also been probabilistic encryption. My second favorite result is, of course, zero knowledge. Tell us, what is zero knowledge?
Okay, I'll tell you about zero knowledge, but then in terms of favorites, I will tell you about primality testing or certifying.
Good. So we'll definitely
So
talk
zero
about
knowledge,
that as well.
The idea is the following, that again, if you want to link it to cryptography, just so that we have some sort of motivation. In fact, let's link it to mental poker. So remember I said there's this game, you want to play poker. The two of us are over the internet or over the phone, and we need a way to have a deck of cards. So that would be emulated by encrypting a bunch of, there's the name of a card, you're encrypting it. There's like 52 cards, and then there's some way to deal cards to each other, to take them out of the deck, to do whatever poker rules of the game dictate. And we had a protocol, Silvio and I, in that original paper. And the only way that we could sort of verify at the end of the game that the game was played correctly was that we, in some sense, opened up all the cards and we showed that everybody followed the rules.
Right. So the dealer did not deal the same card twice.
Right.
He didn't just choose all the red cards for himself.
Right. So there's no really dealer, but that somehow that we follow the protocol, the two of us playing, and at the end. Somebody wins, somebody loses. In order to determine who won and lost and whether we followed, we had to open everything up. Now, in a real poker game, you might not want to describe your strategy.
Right.
So then the question was, can I prove to you that I follow the rules without actually showing you what I did?
Right. So you don't want to say why you took another card, why you didn't decline, but at the end you want to prove you have the winning cards.
I want to prove that I have the winning cards, or we want to just determine that I won the game.
That you won the game. So you don't even reveal the cards. Maybe
that's right.
It's not clear when you are going to bid more, when you're not going to bid more. You don't want to tell me anything about when you're gambling, when you're not.
Right.
You just want to at the end say, okay, look, when we've decided, here's proof that I won the game.
Right, and in fact, poker is just an example. Think about a more bizarre game that we don't even know how to play with a deck. In this game, maybe the deciding who wins or loses is if the, I don't know, exclusive OR of my cards that are encrypted and your cards, somehow represented as binary strings and so forth, equals to 0, okay? So that's another game.
Some complicated function of all my information, all your cards.
There's some complicated winning function. Perhaps not even that we can define the rules, but we don't know how to implement it even with some physical device. Even if we had a deck, even if we had cubes or coins or whatever, maybe we don't know actually how to physically realize a game that we could write down the rules on paper.
Right.
Okay. So the question was, how do I prove to you that I followed those rules without actually showing you exactly all the steps that I took?
Correct.
Just like in the mental poker game example. And zero knowledge, if you want to think about it, is a way to do so. I'm able to prove to you the correctness of a statement without giving you the full proof.
Right.
And you still will believe it. And the correctness of the statement here is that I won the game, or that I followed the rules.
So you started with maybe a game like poker, how to play it. Maybe you had some cryptographic transaction. You said, okay, I could make this secure without revealing anything about my identity other than to reveal that I'm an authorized user, maybe winning the games. But it escalated into something very general.
Right.
There was no longer anything about cryptography.
Right.
There was no more anything about secure transactions on the internet. It was not about playing games over the phone. Zero knowledge actually covers everything today. At what moment did you realize you were going from the problems that you were looking at to everything? Did it come as a surprise to you?
So there's an implicit notion of a proof here, right? Where I'm trying to prove to you some fact. So there's already a prover, who would be me. There's a verifier, who would be you, who's verifying whether the proof is correct.
Right.
And there's some extra ingredients in addition to a classical proof, where we can interact back and forth. So in a classical proof, right, I'll just write down the proof and you would read it. So we can interact back and forth. We may be able to toss coins. So the kind of questions you're going to ask me, we can think of your messages as questions to me that I, as a prover, am going to answer. And if I knew all your questions in advance, we could just write it down. But if you're tossing coins to ask me questions, that means that we might necessitate an interaction. So all these ingredients, okay, which the example of poker is what sort of brought us in that direction, really describe sort of a more generalized view of what a proof is, where it's a process where one person has the ability to prove a statement to another, and yet at the end, the verifier would be able to verify with high probability that the statement is correct, and yet won't be able to prove it to a third party. And that's the generality that you're addressing.
In fact, your ventures into what proofs have been quite well documented. I think interactive proofs started in the same paper. You talked about multi-prover interactive proofs in later works. You talked about probabilistically checkable proofs in even later works. And now you're talking about proofs and delegation. So there is this remarkable role that proofs, and it's not just that you're writing proofs of theorems that you know, you're actually talking about us proving things to others. This seems to have been an ongoing theme. Tell us maybe a little bit more about the highlights over here. Was there an interesting interactive proof that you're aware of, or?
In terms of the beginning?
In terms of the beginning, the middle, any time,
Right, so in the beginning there was a proof that Manuel was very interested in, Manuel Blum, and that was how to prove that a number is a composite number.
So it's not a prime.
That is a product of 2 primes versus 3 primes. So those are both cases which are hard to factor. So how do you even convince it it's a factor of 2 versus 3 is unclear. So that was kind of one of the first examples of an interactive proof. But I want to kind of refer to something else you asked about, that in all of these examples that you mentioned, interactive proofs, multi-prover interactive proofs, PCPs, there is a notion of someone who's verifying, and then there's a notion of someone or something that we call the proof. So in the interactive proof, we kind of anthropomorphize The prover.
Must be a word. Right?
It's an algorithm.
Henceforth, that's a word.
It was an algorithm that receives messages and sends messages, and so I'm the prover, you're the verifier. We're sending messages back and forth. I'm an algorithm, you are maybe a weaker algorithm because I'm able to prove something to you, which you might not know because you are computationally weaker, or because I have some witness to a statement which you don't have. In the multi-prover setting, which came up because zero knowledge essentially was proved in a paper by Goldwasser, Micali, and Vigderson that if one-way functions exist, everything that has a proof has also a zero knowledge proof.
I see.
But they had an assumption if one-way functions exist. And I was visiting Hebrew University in a sabbatical, and I was challenged, is there anything else to prove in cryptography once we know this, that everything can be done in zero knowledge? And sort of to answer that challenge, it was, well, wouldn't it be nice to prove it without assumptions?
Right. Great.
But we can't actually, we don't know how to prove it without assumptions. And so the solution to that challenge was to come up with a different proof model. Okay. So rather than think about a single prover, let's think about two provers.
I see.
And both of them maybe it's a joint paper, they know a proof, and now they're trying to convince me that the proof is correct. Again, they want to do that in zero knowledge. We were going to put them separate them.
In separate rooms.
In separate rooms, like with,
like in the prisoner's dilemma.
Not prisoner's dilemma, but let's say the two of them committed a crime. The crime is that they're trying to cheat me. The proof is not correct. And I want to catch them. And if I don't manage to catch them, I'm the verifier. That's right. Before I was the prover. I'm the verifier. There are these two provers, and I'm going to interrogate them. Perhaps I'm going to use the answer of one to check against the answer of the other. If they are consistent,
then this is good. Okay.
Then this is good.
Okay, good. And so this evolution has led us to remarkable discoveries. They have really changed the shape of the field. Can you tell us a little bit about your role, for example, in the ability of interactive proofs to do things, in the ability of multiple prover interactive proofs to do things? You found what they could do and what they could not do. This led you to some very interesting discoveries also, right?
Yeah, I think that my role, probably what I'm best at, and my role in this evolution, is to come up with or point to these different models. From like the single prover to the multi-prover, and to see connections also between these proof systems and other. So for example, in the connection to hardness approximation, you are thinking of interpretation of a multi-prover proof system as a graph. So you sort of think about the strategy of the proofs, of the prover, as a node in a graph, and two strategies are consistent. Then there might be an edge between them. If they're inconsistent, there is no edge. That defines some sort of graph, and you can think of a clique of this graph as essentially a full strategy of a prover.
So you drifted from a problem in cryptography to a question about logic, interaction, and proofs, and then you now have a problem in combinatorics, and you're trying to find big cliques in graphs.
That's right. And some of the size of the clique of the graph is related to the probability that there is a strategy to convince the verifier to accept. And if there's a small clique, then there's the probability that there is a strategy is small. So in some sense, the strategy is associated with a probability.
So these have been remarkable discoveries. You also mentioned primality testing. What did you want to say about that?
Right. Yeah, so the course of Manuel that sort of started my love of cryptography and love of number theory focused on several problems in number theory. And the first one, or maybe the most basic one, was how do you tell efficiently that a number is prime?
Right. It's a very basic question in number theory.
It's a very basic question in number theory. And if you had all the time in the world, there's no problem. You just try to divide by all the numbers up the square root of p. Right. But can you do it efficiently? Can you do it in polynomial logarithmic in number of bits to write down the prime? And now we know you can. But for a long time, the only way we knew how to do that was to toss coins. Okay. So the question that I worked on...
What does tossing coins do to... So if a number is a prime...
So the idea was that there's essentially there's evidence to be found, conclusive conclusive evidence that a number is composite.
Is not a prime. Good.
Is not a prime.
Okay.
But
when it says that a number is a prime, it could actually be a composite.
Because you haven't found the evidence, right?
So it's not quite the same. But if I say 51 is not a prime, I can say this is 3 times 17. That certainly tells me, convinces everybody who can verify this, that this is not a prime. But how do you prove that some other number, I don't know, maybe 53, is a prime? And you want to come up with some way of convincing me, okay?
Right. So I just want to say that there is a difference between an algorithm and a proof, right? So an algorithm a probabilistic algorithm, you run it, so the input is a number, it's either prime or composite, you run it, and at the end it says to you the conclusion, prime, composite, and these Monte Carlo probabilistic algorithms, when you look at the answer, you say, I believe it, because with very high probability over the coin tosses, he would have given me the correct answer.
Right.
That's different from an algorithm that at the end produces a proof
of its
that you can actually verify 100% the number is composite, or proof that you can verify 100% that the number is prime.
So the algorithm could have been randomized, could be doing anything in the middle, but at the end, whatever it produces is going to be certificate.
Exactly, and that was the work that I, with Joe Killian, who was a graduate student of mine then, and we came up with a primality proving algorithm, where not only that you run the algorithm and at the end you're fairly confident it's correct, but it actually, you toss coins to look for proof that can be verified 100% that the number is prime. And it was using elliptic curves, and the theory of elliptic curves.
It was pretty, I remember trying to read this paper as a graduate student. It was pretty intimidating, I must say. This was traversed as long into the field of number theory, and was pretty much a pretty strong adventure for you to get into this one.
Yeah, but there's always a way to, not always, but certainly in that paper, a way to abstract what is it that these elliptic curves give you.
Right.
So they give you some sort of group structure on points, and somehow you can relate the order of a point to whether, when you're...
When it's a composite or when it's a prime, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Fantastic. So tell us about one more research theme that you liked a lot.
Yeah, perhaps another research theme, which is sort of also early on, is the research theme of property testing. So property testing actually was started by you in the context of algebra, right? Testing you and Ronit, testing linearity, testing low-degree polynomials, where the function is a low-degree polynomial, and these were beautiful notions, very algebraic. And then Oded and Goldreich and Dana Ron and I were talking about this, and somehow it came up. What about why should property testing be only of algebraic objects?
Right.
How about combinatorial objects? So say that you have a graph and you'd like to know whether this graph is can be colored with k colors, or is it far from being colorable with k colors? Or many other questions you could ask about graphs, and you want to test this property. So what's the difference between testing this property and actually deciding? The difference is really that you are not allowed to, in a sense, look at the entire graph. You can only sample it, and at the same time you're relaxing sort of what is required.
Right. So I feel this same relationship, and we talked about things. It was in a very narrow context, algebra. We're going to, be on a very specific problem, and you went again to this complete abstract generality. Take any property, and we want to test it, and you had some notable successes there. So I must say, to me, it was very inspiring to see how you can actually switch perspectives and then suddenly come up with so many interesting questions. So
but I must say that often these things happen in a way that it's very hard to remember, or maybe you can remember it, but it's very hard to understand where the inspiration comes from.
That's true, yeah. So tell us generally about your research philosophy. How do you attack a question? So do you say, this is the problem to be solved, and I will work on it till I'm done with it? 10 years, 20 years? Do you say, here's something that's interesting and I can't think of any good ideas, let me find something else? What drives your choices in research?
So I think many times if I look at these examples, like the course of Manuel, or deciding to work on prime certificates, or later on the property testing, and other things that I'm doing now is these pseudo-deterministic algorithms, which I haven't discussed. So these are algorithms where even though they're randomized, they arrive at it with high probability at a unique decision.
Wow.
I think in almost every single one of these instances, not all of them, I was either listening to a course or I was listening to a talk, and somebody gave a talk that sort of inspired me to think of something else.
Okay.
And then it intrigued me. Or somebody challenged me, like is there anything else to do in cryptography, that they challenged me in Jerusalem.
Right.
And I was sort of answering to a challenge on the spot, or I had a thought during a talk. So that doesn't sound very scientific as a method to find research directions, but it has been my method.
Right. I mean, it is curiosity-driven research, right? I mean, not all research is out there to solve a targeted problem in a targeted and focused way. So maybe this is, tells us about the possibilities of just letting your curiosity run wild. And
right.
Even if the speaker is not intending to ask you that question, you got inspiration to solve some question.
Yes, to solve some question, maybe to define a question.
To define a question.
It's certainly the case that once you define the question and you have some initial ideas which are captivating, maybe it's a definition, maybe it's a solution, hopefully it's both. These fields usually progress if you've managed to get other people curious.
Right.
That certainly was the case for probabilistic encryption, for zero knowledge, for property testing, even for primality based on elliptic curves. It's not always the case, right? And then you start something, you think it's fascinating, you write a few papers. If there's no continuation, these things can sort of die down.
Right. So actually, tell us a little bit about these kinds of experiences. You try something and it works, and sometimes it doesn't work. Did your expectations always match? Were there cases where you did some work and you thought, oh yeah, that's interesting, but everybody liked it a lot? Or the other way around, where you wrote this paper and said, clearly this is my best work ever, or maybe the best work in the last year, and nobody even paid attention. Have you had experiences of either kind?
I think that I've had more experiences where it was a paper, it was an idea that maybe I loved, my co-authors loved, almost all my work is collaborative, but you have no idea the kind of impact it's going to have. I think cryptography in general as a field has had that kind of luck or impact.
Okay.
And also the work on hardness of approximation of clique, as you know, it went very far. Who could have predicted that?
Right. And so there have been upsides, and you are willingly admitting to those.
Oh, there have been downsides.
What about the down ones?
Oh, yeah, of course. There have been downsides where, you write a paper, you think it's very interesting, and then it doesn't get into a conference.
Right. We know about a couple of those, or maybe at least one of those.
Yeah.
That was the famous zero knowledge paper.
Right.
Tell us about your feeling. So zero knowledge, in case the viewer is not aware, was a paper that was submitted 3, 4, 5 times before, 6 times before it was finally accepted, and is now definitely cited as one of the most impressive achievements of that decade. And here you are today. Well, at least you have the ability to be happy about that.
The eventual success.
Eventual success of the story. So yeah, tell us what was going on during those days. Did it dismay you?
So the thing is, luckily for me, this was a paper together with Silvio and with eventually Charlie also, and he's very stubborn. And he doesn't really care about anybody else's opinion. And so we kept on submitting it and improving it, and then eventually got in. And I remember that to Silvio, and maybe by then for me too, it was like so obvious that finally these morons have understood the importance of this work. But seriously, I've had works that have gotten rejected, besides zero knowledge, and some of them never got in. Okay. And then I think it's interesting, and that's it. You put it on your website and you go on. Okay. I think that being stubborn helps.
Okay, good.
But you have to be really stubborn.
That's true. Okay.
But I'll tell you something that, we have these conferences, StockFox conferences. It's harder and harder to get papers there. They're more technical than they ever used to be. Right. And often it is exactly those papers that don't go with the grain, but they go against the grain, they won't get in.
Right.
because the committee doesn't understand, or the committee is obliged to take things which are more sort of
Along
follow.
the well-trodden path. Yeah.
Exactly. And to address that, we started new conferences.
Right.
One of the conferences was theoretical TCC, which is in cryptography rather than crypto. Another conference was ITCS, right, Innovation in Theoretical Computer Science, where the idea is this is the kind of work that these conferences are supposed to take. I think often you start this way, eventually it becomes another conference that has its own agenda.
Right, yeah, I think so. So certainly there seem to be a lot of, you've taken a lot of interest in developing in, I think TCC, you mentioned ITCS. You've been engaged in the creation of these conferences, setting them with an agenda which is somewhat different, and it seems to be part of the organic process. So do you enjoy these, now that you see how the conferences are doing now, do you think they're satisfying their objectives, or does one need to keep fine-tuning this thing?
I think that they are satisfying. They're doing better than what was done before. Mm-hmm. I think you have to keep on innovating.
Okay.
We had this idea of graduating bits, where graduate students can come and introduce themselves for a few minutes.
Right.
And session chair rants, where the session chair actually gives a summary of the papers in the conference. But these things cannot stay fixed, because if they stay fixed, they don't really serve. They don't serve their function. But I got to say that. I don't know if one should admit that, but often my role in these, evolutions or in these new ventures, it comes from a place of frustration. So it's because I don't like the way things are done.
That's right.
It's a little bit of a kind of an impulsive reaction, saying, "Oh, that's not the way to do it. Let's do it differently.
Great.
Let's shake it up."
Okay.
So I would love it if it came from a place of peace, but it doesn't.
Right, but I guess maybe that's part of the passion that drives research, is also some frustration and some angst. So
impatience.
And impatience and so on. Collaborations, tell me a little bit about that. You've had wonderful collaborators and even more impressive, maybe not more impressive, a pretty impressive set of students. How do you sort of how do you view research in a collaborative environment? How do you view research with your students and so on? Tell us a little bit about these experiences of yours.
So these things change over time, obviously. Mm-hmm. So early on, all of my collaborators were kids or people my age, like Silvio and Oded and Avi and Miki Benor. So these were people who we were all sort of graduating at the same time, more or less.
Okay.
And it was part of our kind of fight, or our progression as scientists, to talk about problems together, to go to dinner and talk about problems, to stay after dinner and talk about problems. It was like our life was really working and collaborating. So it was
so
research and
even
fun.
Though you're all competing for the same attention from the same people, you're actually collaborating with each other.
I think, we're collaborating with each other because we enjoy it, because we can do much better work when we collaborate than on our own.
Okay.
And perhaps this group of people is just very interactive. And they don't like to sit in a room alone and think, but they actually enjoy company and got a lot out of this kind of collaboration. In terms of students, early on I never worked with my students, but then as time progresses, all of these colleagues, they each go and they have their own, not exactly kingdom, but they have their own world.
Right.
They go to different areas, they might even go geographically to different locations. And now, if you want to collaborate, you collaborate with your students.
Okay, so sounds very natural. And how has that been going with your students?
I've had wonderful students, really incredible students.
So you've been at MIT, you've been at Berkeley, you're back here at Berkeley, you've been at Weizmann. Mm-hmm. Anything which is strikingly different about the different places? Was it nicer at Berkeley? Was it nicer at Weizmann? Was it nicer at MIT? Anything you want to say?
So first of all, I think that this community, our community of theoretical computer science, is extremely tight-knit. Mm-hmm. So the style of research that's done at Berkeley and in Weizmann and MIT is very similar in the sense of we value the same type of results. So we probably would agree what a great result is, what an interesting result is. I mean, there's individual differences, but altogether this is the same community. In terms of graduate students, I was a graduate student at Berkeley, so it's hard for me to comment on the graduate students as a professor at Berkeley since I just arrived.
Okay.
I think that at MIT I've been the longest and have been exposed to most number of graduate students. MIT has tons of graduate students. The quality is extremely high. They are probably more technical than we were at Berkeley at the time. I don't know about the typical Berkeley student now. My guess is it might still be the case that MIT would draw these people who are more intense and sort of more technically inclined. At Weizmann, again, the numbers are smaller. The weather is better. That lends itself to a certain kind of interaction.
You're comparing with MIT or Berkeley now?
I'm comparing with MIT.
With MIT, right? Okay, good. So let me move on to aspects other than just the research and the environment of the research. Tell us a little bit about the Turing Award. So how is it determined for the layperson? Who decides on the Turing Award? Do you know anything?
I assume that the Turing Award is decided. I mean, I know
it's not a
the Turing Award is decided by a committee.
By a committee,
and there's the first thing that one has to understand about every award is that in order to win it, you have to be nominated for it.
Okay.
So somebody.
That sounds like a very.
This is just a side. You don't have to add it, but I was head of an award committee in Israel. And you get one in chemistry, and one in physics, and one in biology, and one in math. And it turned out that the 4 award winners were all men. And then there was this uproar, like, how come no women winners? And I said, it's well known that in order to be awarded, you have to be nominated.
Nominated.
If you're going to nominate women, they will win.
Okay.
So in any case, you have to be nominated.
Right.
And I guess somebody nominated us. Silvio and I won it together. And then I guess there's many or several nominations, and the award committee has to make a decision.
And this is awarded every year?
This is awarded every year.
Every year. And you got it in
2012?
2012. So one interesting thing that I found about the award, was it definitely cited your work on probabilistic encryption, on zero-knowledge proofs. And those happened when you were a graduate student. It's a little far away from when 2012, when you got the award. Why this age difference? Why does the award like to wait for a little while to get the results soaked? So
I think part of the reason why they quoted that is because Silvio and I sort of went in different ways. The problems he worked on and problems I worked on were different.
Afterwards.
So I worked on more complexity-like problems,
right?
Starting with the primality and then going to the hardness approximation and the different models where he worked on distributed computing, he worked on game theory. So they cited the things we did in common.
Okay.
But why wait? Because you don't know. It's really a test of time. Okay. So the impact of work, it can only be determined
after many years.
After many years. And in fact, even zero knowledge has had a lot more impact maybe since 2012 than before 2012.
Right. Sounds good. So tell us about the award. So how did you find out that you're getting the award?
There was this phone call by the head of the committee, and he said that he's calling from ACM, and he wants to tell me that I won the Turing Award together with Silvio.
Right. I thought when you said they called from the ACM, you said, no, I'm not buying.
Yeah, I was really happy to win this award with Silvio.
Okay.
I think that was probably...
Like it was a relief in some sense?
It was probably the happiest thing about winning this award is that we won it together. Because we've been friends for so many years and we've done all this work together. Right. And it was not going to be a lonely experience, It was going to be a joyous, common experience.
I can sympathize with that. How does it affect you? It's only been 6 years, and you've had a fairly long career before. But how does it affect your career? Do you find that you're suddenly expected to do different kinds of research now that you won the Turing Award? Do you think people pay more or less attention to you when you say something? How is it easier to get funding for the research that you want to do?
That's a good question. I think that, first of all, people who say that it didn't impact them, they're lying. I've met a lot of people who won these awards and, even more famous awards like a Nobel Prize. And I'm sure that it impacts everyone because the kind of attention you get is unprecedented. And obviously, you've got a lot more commitments. You're supposed to be invited to a lot more talks.
Okay.
And people expect you to write more letters. And that takes away time from other things, like doing research.
Right.
That's one thing. Do they pay more attention to what you say? I'm not sure.
Okay.
They pay different attention.
I see.
But I'm not sure they pay more attention. What else did you ask?
Yeah, I mean, just funding, for instance.
Funding. No, I did not find that at all. I don't think getting funding is easier. I don't think getting papers accepted is easier.
Easier.
No.
Okay.
I think our field is completely pays no attention.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but on the other hand, maybe that's a good sign, right? I
It's a good sign of the field. Yeah.
We want people, when you're funding, looking at funding, well, we just want everybody to get funded.
Yes.
And when it comes to papers, we would like all the good papers to be accepted, no matter who, right?
That's true. Assuming that people have good judgment when they review work, and that's a subject for a different interview.
Right, but we did bring that up in the context of ITCS before, that we are always playing a game between our tastes and, starting new directions versus closing out old directions in some sense.
Exactly, and it's much easier to evaluate closing an old direction than to evaluate opening a new one where taste is required or maybe foresight.
Right, yeah. So you brought up the Nobel Prize and you said, it's an even more famous prize. So now let me, my computer scientist in me is jumping out in agony. So we don't have a Nobel Prize. No computer scientist is going to win a Nobel Prize for being a computer scientist. They could win it for being an economist, they could win it for being a physicist, but not for, I don't know, Nobel Prize winners in Berkeley get their own parking spot. Do you get one?
Well, I pay for one.
You pay for one, but you don't get your own placard saying this is a parking prize reserved for a Turing Award winner. So is this a way of systematically discriminating against computer science, or even more broadly against all new engineering? I mean, why should an award that was established 100 years ago determine the priorities of a university or the research environment or even the press today in terms of determining what is important in good research? Do you feel that this is a challenge for computer science and for all emerging fields?
I think computer science is very special. We've absolutely changed the world. Right. I mean, it's clear that the impact of computer science in terms of communication, in terms of computation, in terms of the internet, it's the banking, the shopping. There's no question whatsoever that we have changed the world. Okay? Right. And but people in fields like chemistry and biology and physics who do this amazing work about the origin of life and on the micro and the macro level, they all recognize that.
Right.
And this is and therefore, I think the status of our prizes in our field definitely is going to change.
It's going to change.
It is changing because there's no question about it.
Even though I realize that, I don't know, I hope this happened before you won the Turing Award rather than after, but the prize money went from being, $100,000 to $1 million to match the Nobel Prize. That was only recently.
Unfortunately, it happened after.
Unfortunately, it happened after. So at least, that's one reasonable grudge to have. You did not get your $1 million out of getting a Turing Award as the Nobel Prize winners would have gotten.
You know the story about my Turing Award check?
No.
So I was in the ACM banquet in San Francisco, and they call all these prizes, and the last prize they call is the Turing Award, and you go up to the stage, and they give you some kind of plaque. And you shake their hands and you get off. And okay, good. The next day, my sister asks me, she was in the banquet, she said, so can I see the check? I say, what check? She said, they gave you a check on the stage. I said, no, they didn't give me any check. They gave me a plaque. She says, they definitely gave you an envelope. I'm like, really? She said, I don't remember that. So I call Silvio up because he got a check too. The check was split, the prize was split in half. And I said, did you get a check? And he said, yeah, I got a check. I already deposited it. I said, oh my God. So this is like more than $100,000. And then I guess I left it on the table.
Oh my God.
So I called ACM and I said, listen, I feel a little uncomfortable, but I think I've left the check on the table. So they cut me another check.
They cut you another check. Did somebody, maybe, cleaning staff, some other person at your table, maybe they took the check and cashed it? Huh?
I doubt it.
You doubt it. Oh, okay. Well, you seem to have a higher regard for our community. All right. So, talking about communities, actually, what's going well, what's not going well? We brought up the issue of women in the field. I mean, women getting awards in general, underrepresented minorities. We definitely seem to be lacking those, especially at the research level, or not lacking them in sheer number, but there are much fewer than we'd like. So what is going on with our field? Is the trajectory going up? Is it going down?
I think that our field is composed of a bunch of subfields.
Okay.
In a particular subfield of cryptography, actually, the representation of women, I think, is good. In the sense, at least, that there's a very well-known women who are doing phenomenally well.
Right.
In a fundamental work. They have jobs in very prestigious universities and research labs. And I think there's also representation among the graduate students of women. In other subfields, it's not the case. My feeling is that it has a lot to do with the mentorship.
Okay.
So in other words, it could be a woman professor, it could be a man professor, but some people you see that they have women graduate students and some don't. So there must be something that those who have women graduate students are doing right or are doing different in any case. So I think that might be something to learn. It's clear. It's not that somebody has one woman. There's usually either a bunch of women graduate students or none. So mentorship, I think, is very important. I think, from what I understand, the number of women graduate students is going down. It's not going up, especially relatively to other fields in computer science, or in theoretical computer science specifically.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Okay.
Maybe the opportunities in industry are so good that people are not going to graduate school.
Right. Okay, so this seems to be like just definitely a problem to be solved. Do you have any, I mean, you said mentorship is important. In general, as as a mentor, what are things that we could do better, you think? I mean, are there any obvious things that people are either not doing or doing wrong that you would, when you mentioned one example, nominate more women for awards? Are there other things that you sort of think about? Well,
it's not only awards, nominate for awards, nominate for fellowships. Other things is, often when you have a graduate student in the beginning of their career, not always, but sometimes, you might have a problem that you've partially worked out, and you tell the graduate student, here's this idea, this is roughly what the solution is, and then they go and they write it up, or they actually solve it completely, and then they write it up. And the question is whether you would do that to the same extent for women than you would for men, because after all, you want the result to be written up, and maybe some people believe that the men will do a better job.
Wow.
So being aware of the fact that those type of nuggets, or give it a good topic.
At the initial stage.
Yes,
right?
that's right. Give a good topic to a woman as much as a man. I think people should be aware of that.
Right.
And that's something that requires thinking purposefully.
Okay.
It's
good.
not an accidental.
Okay, good. And you've had a fair number of women graduate students, and so
Yes.
you probably think about this a lot.
I think my women graduates have been so good that you didn't have to give them nuggets.
Maybe you did not.
But
maybe they give you nuggets.
But I think I'm not intimidating.
Right.
And perhaps that's another thing that, again, it's generalizing, right? Some men are like that as well. Probably women would be more intimidated than men are in the beginning of the career before they get confident, because they don't start from the point of view of like, I know everything.
Right.
So one has to be a little careful about not to be intimidating. To some people that comes naturally, some people less.
Right. Okay. All right. So I think we're about to wrap up. I'll want to ask you a little bit about the future. So tell us both about your hopes and for the future of computer science, not just the community, where we definitely want to see better diversity, but in terms of research for the field and also your own research. Where do you want it to go next?
So in terms of computer science and research for the field, obviously I think we've been extremely successful as a theory community to come up with ideas that have somehow changed, they changed our field in the sense that they've been rich and had lots of connections to mathematics, more generally, and developed beautiful ideas, beautiful constructs, like this evolution of a proof.
Right.
And in addition to being beautiful mathematically and complex, they've also had impact on applications. Right. We've been living in a, I guess it's a few decades where, as we said in the beginning, cryptography enabled electronic commerce. You know, there's this advent of cloud computing, and we're talking now about how to delegate our computations to the cloud and get proofs that the computation was done correctly. Again, a result of sort of the idea of interactive proof,
Right.
where it's much easier to verify a proof than to actually perform
All
the computation that then you want to prove is
Right.
correct. Then another example is now with machine learning that everybody's talking about how we can use data in order to come up with automated procedures that make predictions, that you kind of learn from the data. There's a question about where is this data coming from, how do we keep it private, how do we do machine learning on private data, how do we train models on private data, how do we classify private data. So I think cryptography will have a role to play, I think a significant role to play in how machine learning is done in the future.
Okay.
In terms of my own, my hope for my own, so as you know, I started being the director here of the Simons Institute.
Right. Okay.
It's a very different kind of role than I've had in the past. I've been a researcher, I've had students, I've had postdocs, I've written papers. The role here is to also have some sort of scientific leadership, which is translates to enabling and pushing for programs that do beautiful work mathematically and also have a chance to yield impact going forward. It also requires making sure that the Institute is doing well from lots of other perspectives and will do so in perpetuity. I hope that I am successful at this work. And maybe more than everything, I hope that in spite of the fact that this is a new role, that I still manage to have some creative ideas and have the creative juices flowing and come up with new projects and new ideas.